Thanks for doing this, Amy. Welcome, everybody.
Thanks.
I'm here from Workplace Education Manitoba, and I am here with Amie Membreño. She's going to be sharing her topic, how to adapt to your new workplace. She is with the Immigration Centre. I'm going to give you a little brief bio on Amie before we get to hear from her. So Amie has always had a worldview when it comes to life and career. She's born in Winnipeg and she's lived in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, working a variety of jobs to pay the bills while pursuing her passion, which is volunteering in Bible education work. While learning Spanish, Amie expanded her volunteer work in 2006 to construction projects in El Salvador and Bible education work in rural areas of Nicaragua, later working as an English teacher. In 2010, after returning to Canada, she started volunteer at the Conversation Group Facilitation at Immigration Centre Manitoba. Was soon hired as an employment facilitator, and in 2016 she was promoted to the manager of the Employment Service Department. With cooperation and support from her team, ICM executives and the funders, the Employment Department has nearly tripled in size, and workshops and resources for clients are often delivered in 9 languages and expanding each year. That's what happens when I get tongue-tied. My apologies. Amie is a certified career coach through the University of Winnipeg Transition Center, and has studied program development for adult learners at the University of Manitoba and project management at Red River College. Amie also has trained in community interpretation, anti-oppression, anti-racism, nonviolent crisis intervention, mental health first aid, family violence, psychological first aid, as well as training in conflict management, leadership, and coaching. We could have you talk on many different topics, but we're here to talk about the one you are. Amie believes learning and career development is a lifelong pursuit and is always willing to learn, grow, and develop her skills, and she supports others to find their purpose as well. So please help me welcome Amie as our presenter today. Thanks, Amie.
Thanks, Donna. Thanks for having me. And so thank you very much for joining us at this presentation, How to Adapt to Your New Workplace. The program that I'm going to be presenting is for people that might be newer to Canada, or even those who have been in Canada but maybe have not worked very often in the workplace. We want to invite you that if you have any questions, you can definitely go onto the chat, and we will be trying to answer your questions throughout the presentation as well. So I've made a broad or a presentation that can be adaptable to different people and different questions, but definitely if we have some questions, please feel free to put those down in the chat. Before we get started, I wanted to acknowledge the land that we're on. So our workshop today is located on the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. And we respect the treaties that were made on these territories. And we also acknowledge the harms and the mistakes of the past and dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. For those of you that maybe not have a lot of information on the Indigenous people of Manitoba, invite you as well to download for yourself the Guide for Newcomers, the Indigenous People of Manitoba Guide for Newcomers, which shows the different tribes that are living in Manitoba and gives us a little bit more information as well. So today in our presentation, there's 8 different subjects we're going to discuss. The first one is when you're starting a new job, the first thing that you should do is take good care of yourself. Then we're going to learn about how to prepare for your first day of work, how to understand company policies, how to be a good employee in the Canadian workplace, also what it means to understand and follow employment standards, as well as know your rights and responsibilities when it comes to safe work, and use WCB assistance if you're injured at work. And of course, to continue to take care of yourself as you adapt to your new workplace. So, to talk a little bit more about taking care of yourself, some people, when they're under stress or going through a difficult or a challenging experience, we can be a little bit hard on ourselves. But it's important to realize that starting a new job, even though it's an exciting thing, it can also be stressful. So we really want to make self-care a priority. If we're not taking care of ourselves, it might be hard for us to learn new things, to be at our best when it comes to being with other people. So there's a few things to remember to do. And I would start this especially a week before you start your new job. So making sure you're eating nutritious food, that you're exercising, that you're getting plenty of sleep. If you're feeling nervous, talk to your family, your friends about it. Make sure to reach out if you're feeling overwhelmed. There's a number of different organizations that can have either numbers that people can call or drop in counseling if someone is feeling very stressed or anxious. And try to eliminate additional stressors. So if there's something that you can put off to the side, especially the first few weeks of your new job, try to eliminate things that you don't need to deal with in that very moment. And one of the biggest things that we like to mention to our clients at Immigrant Centre is when you're looking for work or when you're starting a new job, don't forget to enjoy life. That can make a huge difference between whether we go in to work with a smile or if we're going in just feeling a little bit tired or negative or overwhelmed. One of the things you can do to prepare for your first day of work, so before you even go into the start your new job, is research to know what to expect on your first day. So sometimes you can ask the person that hired you how to prepare. They might have some things that you can read or look over. If you know anybody that already works at the company, you can ask those employees what to expect. And you can even review the company website under the About Us or Careers or News section, just to know what's happening lately at that organization or at that business, and get an idea of what to expect. Another thing, I'm going to go back here. Another thing that you can do as well to do research is looking at their social media, or even company. There's a website called Glassdoor. There's glassdoor.ca, and you can look up a company just to get an idea of how other employees have felt working at that company and what to expect from the company culture or your first day of work. Another thing you need to make sure to do before you go into work is that you have your proper identification. So in Canada, in order to be an employee, you need to have your social insurance number in order to be able to work in Canada. And so those of you that have a social insurance number that starts with a 9, that means it's a temporary social insurance number. Those are usually tied in with work permits. Another thing that we want to have is if you're in Canada on a work permit or a student permit, you might have to bring those immigration documents in just to show the employer that you are allowed to work for that company. And in some cases on work permits, people might have stipulations like not allowed to work with children or not allowed to work in healthcare, or other kind of the stipulations on there. So if you do have any questions about how to get those removed, Immigrant Centre does offer some services in our settlement department that can teach people how to remove those kind of things off of your work permit so you can work at any company. Also important is for you to know your address, your phone number, your postal code. so that you can fill out the government forms. And also you can either bring in a void check, or like most people use now is on your banking app. You can usually look up your banking information, your account information, and you'll be needing to have that to set up direct deposit. So you can get your paycheck right into your bank account. And of course, bringing a notebook and pen can be really helpful for when you're learning your new job in the first few days. And make sure that you're dressing appropriate for the position and that you're bringing lunch or a snack. So these things can be very basic to starting a new job, but sometimes it's a good idea to just have a little list to make sure that you're well prepared and you don't have to worry about things the morning of. Now, when you get to work at a company, most companies have an orientation. And so people will be filling out, included in that orientation is company and government paperwork, learning about the policies, union agreements, reading the employment manual. You might even do a tour of the workplace and meet your coworkers. And you might be training with either a coworker or a supervisor or a manager. So when it comes to government paperwork, the kind of forms you're going to fill out is federal income tax forms and provincial income tax forms. And you have to put your name, address, birth date, and social number on those forms. That is a legal requirement. And there are additional things that you can choose to fill out on those forms if you want to pay more or less taxes on your paycheck. And that all just depends on your situation. So if you want more information about that, then you can go to CRA's website, or you can also talk if you're getting a lot of money back at tax time or not enough money back at tax time. That might be an indication that you want to edit how much taxes you're paying on that government paperwork. Also, during orientation, they'll talk to you about company policies, and those are usually outlined for you in the employee manual. And so the company's employee manual, they're going to be talking about probation periods. Those can usually last 3 to 6 months at most companies. They'll talk about dress code or the uniform policy. They talk about how people can take break times. Some companies might have specific times when you have to take your breaks. Other companies are telling you how much time you have for your breaks, and it's up to you to schedule that. There's also information usually about if you're arriving late or what to do in case you're sick or have a doctor's appointment. And then they also will show information on how many vacation days you have and information about general or other holidays. So whether you are getting paid for all of those holidays, or whether you have to work, or whether you'd get those days off. And a lot of companies nowadays also have social media policies. And so I would always recommend to review those because as an employee, even if you have your own personal Facebook or Instagram account, or whatever new social media there is out there, what you're posting reflects on the company that you're working for. So sometimes people have been disciplined or worse because of things that they're posting do not fit in with the company policies or with the image that the company wants to give to its customers. So when you're training, when you're learning about these policies or learning the steps in your new job, it's really important to take initiative and to learn to do your job well. It is up to the company to give you training and information, but it's up to you to actually absorb it and do it properly and check in that you're doing it right. So one of the things I like to recommend is if you can get the training materials before you start so that you can review them, that's fantastic. That's going to help you to remember things. So read all the training materials. And if you're with a trainer or someone's showing you what to do, make sure to listen to them first. and watch them as they're going ahead and performing that task. You can even take notes, ask them to pause, write things down in the meantime, and then practice doing that same task with supervision, and finally ask for questions for clarification or ask for feedback. So, what I found is some employees especially new employees, some of them want so badly to show that they understand at the beginning of training, that it can be a little bit difficult to have them really listen and go through all of those details. But don't be afraid to ask questions, and get clarification. And of course, share what you're understanding as well. And we'll talk about that when we're looking at active listening as well. Yeah, and some useful tips when you're doing your training is just review the training materials and your notes at the end of your workday, or maybe even at home. You can even write down questions that you want to ask the person that's training you, and make sure that you're bringing your notebook and your training materials to work and whenever you're learning new tasks, just to make sure that you're doing them properly and following along. And don't worry about speed at the beginning. The most important thing is that you're learning how to do your job accurately. And once you know the task, then you can focus on getting faster. But I've seen many people focus on speed and then they're really challenged at making mistakes, and then it ends up taking longer than expected because they weren't doing things carefully. In the workplace, especially in the Canadian workplace, culture has a strong effect on how people work. And for the most part, what they say about culture is everybody wants the same thing. Everyone wants to be treated with respect. They want to show respect for others. They want to be show that they're capable of doing things. It's just that sometimes, depending on a culture where someone comes from, we do these things and we show these things in different ways. So Canada being a multicultural environment, there's not going to be one specific way of doing things. And just because you've worked with one company doesn't mean a different company will do things the exact same way. So it can be difficult to describe what culture is, because it's made up of what we call unwritten rules. But the best thing I can say is when you're adapting to a new workplace, observe people, talk to people, take a step back. And this might be really important as well when you think, oh, there's some improvements that I can make. And I would say maybe even hold off on trying to make suggestions for improvements for the first maybe month to 3 months. There might be certain ways that a company does things or a way that the company interacts with each other based on the culture. One of the easiest ways I can demonstrate that is, let's say you have 2 different restaurants, and you can work at 2 different restaurants, but they both have different cultures. So one restaurant might be McDonald's. They're focusing on speed, on value for money, and so their culture is going to be very different than if you're going to an expensive restaurant like a steakhouse that a meal might cost $300. So if you start off at McDonald's and then you're trying to implement that same culture at the steak restaurant, it might not be accepted, even if the ideas for efficiency and value make sense. It might not be the right culture. So again, observing can be the best way of learning before you make suggestions on change. Something else to keep in mind is that most Canadian employers are focusing on soft skills. So soft skills can be difficult to teach, but that's really how you're interacting with people, the fact that you're able to take care of yourself, that you know about your own needs, that you can even notice when you need to fix things. Whereas technical skills, which are often things like, how we use a computer, or they might be more of an educational background. Those things, while being important, are things that anybody can learn, whereas soft skills, that might be a longer term process to improve our soft skills. So in the new workplace, you might want to be focusing on your soft skills, and doing your best to learn the technical skills according to the job. As well, skills that Canadian employers value would include things like punctuality and attendance, being efficient, and being focused on self-improvement, and also having good communication and showing respect. So this can also be different in different workplaces. So when it comes to punctuality and attendance, I know I worked for a German airline for a number of years, where it was here in Canada, but it was a German airline, and we kind of followed that similar culture of punctuality, where they said if you're 1 minute late, you are late. And if you're late 3 times in a year, you are fired. And so that kind of punctuality was very important. There might be other jobs where the schedule is a little bit more flexible. So maybe you can come in, 15 minutes late or half an hour late, but as long as you're working the hours you're scheduled to work, it's not such a big deal. And so, again, depending on the workplace, that punctuality and attendance will be different. But even in organizations where there's a little bit more trust from the employer on their employees on attendance and punctuality, and they're not necessarily watching you closely to make sure that that's happening. If they do find that you are coming in late and then you're leaving at the regular time and you're not working, then that can really cause some problems with the employer. So don't view maybe having a company where the manager or the company is a little bit more relaxed as something where you can take advantage and not necessarily work the hours that you are scheduled to work. Also, efficiency and self-improvement. When it comes to being efficient, trying to do the job as quickly and efficiently as possible is important, but effectiveness is what is important. So sometimes we can find ways of doing the job quicker, but then the work you're doing is not as effective. So all of those kind of things have to be balanced. And when we talk about self-improvement, it's really trying to always grow your skills in the workplace. And we'll talk a little bit more about communication and respect in the next slides. Are there any questions so far? So far in the chat, I had just seen a hello, a greeting, but I'm just going to pause here and see if there were any questions or any comments or things that people wanted to focus on so far. Oh, Donna, sorry, you're muted.
I do that so you can't hear me tap my pen, even though I'm not on the screen. There's no questions so far, but I think we will have some questions usually as we get to that space. And I have a whole bunch of questions for you. So
great.
I'm enjoying the topic.
Okay. I'll continue going then. And then as the chats pop up, then that'll be wonderful. So when it comes to communication skills and respect in the workplace, there are some things that are very common in the Canadian workplace. So teamwork is often highly valued in the Canadian workplace. There might be some kind of jobs or positions or companies where people are working individually, but really that teamwork, that ability to collaborate with others is important. Also, we'll talk about topics of conversation, what's appropriate and inappropriate for talking about in the workplace, and active listening and using communication softeners. All of these can be very different depending on what country you're working in. When it comes to teamwork, some ways that you can show that you're a team player is making sure that you're completing your part of the work, and then offering support to a coworker that might need it as well. So keeping that balance as well of making sure that you're not always supporting others to the detriment of your own work, but finding that balance between making sure that your work can get done and then also offering support to others. Also, in Canada, we want to treat everybody with respect, no matter what their position is. It is not a country with a very hierarchical-based culture. We don't commonly call our superiors sir or ma'am or Mr. or Mrs. or Ms. We'll be using first names basis. But at the same time, the people that might be in a more entry-level position, such as the front desk receptionist, or maybe it's the person that's cleaning the offices in the evening or during the day, everyone deserves to have the same respect. And so just making sure that when we're in the workplace, we're not treating people differently based on their salaries or their position is extremely important. And you might notice a difference in Canadian meetings is that people are often asked to share their ideas and their views openly, but being respectful as well when they're doing something, when they're sharing something or have a new idea. And especially when someone is sharing information at a meeting, we don't want to be on our phones. We don't want to be doodling. We don't want to ignore it or interrupt them. We want to listen. So that's repeated 3 times, listen, 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 because that's a huge part of being on a team. Speaking of being on a team, that often means that we're going to be talking with people and conversing with people throughout the day. In some countries, it might be very common during the workday to talk about personal items or families or things like that. In other countries, it's unheard of to bring up anything personal. So in Canada, we're often, during the working periods, we want to focus on the job at hand, limit personal conversations, but there might be small conversations of like 5 minutes that come up during the workday, but we want to keep a limit on that. We also want to share our ideas about the company and what we can do to improve things or deal with problems during meetings. And if we have concerns or complaints about the company, it might be something where we want to try and do some research ourselves. But it's best to talk to the supervisor or the manager or somebody else in a position of authority instead of complaining to coworkers. Now, there might be times when we want to talk about it with 1 or 2 coworkers about an issue, but we want to make sure that it's with the idea of resolving the problem and not assigning blame to a certain person. And so, again, part of work is making sure that everyone feels respected and having a limit on gossip at work and having a limit on creating an us against them kind of dynamic in the workplace. So if there is something that can't be resolved, again, talk to the supervisor, the manager, rather than talking about it with your coworkers. Now, during breaks, it can be very different. During breaks, people might be talking more about personal things like hobbies or jobs that they've had in the past, maybe about their families, their friends. We sometimes have to be careful about talking about age or pay or religion, politics, disabilities, race, and sexual orientation. And again, there's many different people working in the workplace from different cultures. So you might even find that with certain groups, you can talk about these things during breaks and nobody gets offended. But it's best to observe at first to see the kind of conversations people are having on breaks before we try to have one of these subjects. And especially when you're in a new job, it's usually best not to get too personal and respect other privacies, other people's privacy. And if you're in a group of people in the break room, it might be helpful to speak English, even if there's people that speak your own language, just to show respect for others, that there's no secrets being shared. Although there might be times when it's appropriate to have a conversation a little bit more on the side in a different language. But for the most part, if you're sitting at a table with 4 people and then you and another person start having a conversation in a separate language and excluding others, again, that could be felt as disrespectful. So trying to speak a common language. And of course, avoiding gossip, kind of mentioned in the last one too. When we're in the workplace, part of our good communication skills is also active listening. So with active listening, we try to focus on the speaker to understand their message. So for me, I know I often have people coming to my door at work. I manage a team of 16 people. So if I'm on my computer and I'm writing an email and someone comes to my door and I say, just give me 1 second, I finish my email and then I turn to that person and I give them my full attention. Because I know if they start talking while I'm still writing my email, I might end up typing what they're saying, or I might be writing and then I turn to them and I have no idea what they said. That's just me. I can't focus on 2 or 3 things at the same time. And so again, focusing on the speaker so that you can understand what they're saying. And sometimes that means too, when we're speaking, giving that person the chance to put aside what they're working on so that they can give us their full attention. And while we're listening, if we are listening, we shouldn't be guessing at what the speaker might say. So if we're hearing, we might have the time to be able to think about, oh, this is what the problem is. I'm going to say this. But then we're not actually absorbing the message from the other person. So again, don't guess what the person might say, just listen. And before you respond, take a second and pause and think about what the other person said. Just to think of, did I understand that right? What are they meaning? How should I respond? And then paraphrase the message back just to check understanding. So someone might come to my office and say, oh, I've got a doctor's appointment this afternoon. I need to leave around 2. And so I might respond back, okay, so are you asking me to get off today at 2:00 instead of 4:30? Is that what you're asking me? And then clarifying the details. So again, it kind of requires a little bit of patience to have good communication skills. We live in an environment right now where everything seems to be quick, fast, get it done. But sometimes when we don't take that time to clear our minds, listen to others, confirm understanding, that's when we have issues later on. So while we talked about efficiency as being important, effectiveness is also important. And if the communication isn't effective, we might waste a lot of time and energy working or doing something that we don't need to do. Or even if those relationships do break down because the communication is not effective, then we might have to spend a lot of time repairing those relationships. So again, It seems like a lot of steps just to listen to someone, but when we practice these kind of steps, it can be really helpful to make our lives a lot more efficient and easier in the long run. Okay. And I believe this is one of the last sections on communication. But Canadian workplaces often use what we would call communication softeners. And we use those communication softeners to show respect. So other English-speaking cultures might be a little bit more direct. So maybe, for example, in another culture, they might say, okay, we must do this, or you must do this. In Canada, we might soften that to something to say we could. We still mean we must, but we might use that wording we could to almost give the other person the option of agreeing or disagreeing with us. Or if we're having a conversation and we need clarification, instead of saying what, like what did you say? We might say, excuse me, could you repeat that, please? Or instead of saying, I think, when we're talking about a subject, we could say, I'm wondering if, for example, instead of saying, I think we should have 5 people on this committee, if you're saying, I'm wondering if we should have 5 people on this committee. And again, that generates a little bit more discussion instead of one person imposing their ideas and their thoughts on others. Or instead of, if you're working as a manager, instead of saying, oh, do this, like go and put this in that person's office, using conversation or communication softeners might sound more like, would it be possible for you to put this in the other person's office? So the reason why communication softeners are used is because it helps with clarity, conciseness, coherence, and consensus. So again, we try to use the simplest words. We try to use keep the information short, make sure the information we're giving is in logical order. And again, the reason why communication softeners are so important is because it results in more harmony and more agreement. So we avoid friction and problems. And again, it feels like it might be a bit of a waste of time, but when we keep our relationships in harmony at work, we avoid a lot more stress, and we can often work more effectively as a team as well. Now we're going to talk a little bit about rights as an employee. So in Canada, employees are protected by different laws, such as employment standards. And so those are acts and regulation that set out standards for wages and working conditions. And there's 2 different kinds of employment standards. There's the federal employment standards, and then there's provincial employment standards. And so again, they're making these laws to enforce what that ensures that everyone works in a safe and a respectful workplace with fair treatment. And so they're covering not only the employee, making sure that the employee is treated fairly, but they also try to make sure that the employer is treated fairly and they can run their business properly. So depending on the type of job or the company that you're working for, you might fall under the provincial or the the federal employment standards. So 90% of jobs fall under the provincial employment standards. And so most jobs in Manitoba would fall under Manitoba employment standards. And in each province, the employment standards for that province is going to be different. Now, federal employment standards, those usually account for 10% of jobs. And the federal employment standards would include the jobs that don't fall under the provincial category. So maybe if you're working for an airline, so in the morning you start off in one province, in the afternoon you're in a different province, and maybe the next day you're working in a third province. It's kind of hard for the airline to decide which provincial standards that person would fall under on a given day. So those kind of companies, their employees would follow the federal employment standards. Or of course, if you're working for the federal government, again, because they have different employees throughout the country, they'd be looking more at the federal employment standards, especially because they might be working in multiple provinces, depending on what they're doing in a certain day. So employment standards include regulations on things like minimum wage, how overtime is calculated, who gets to decide on work schedules and breaks, and how many breaks you're entitled to. It also talks about general holidays, so that might be different as well. How many vacation days that you are allowed to have in a certain year, leaves of absences as well, and even information on when either the company is terminating you, so you might be getting laid off or fired, or notice of termination, so when you're deciding to quit or to go on a leave of absence or some other way, stop your employment as well. And so I've included both the Government of Manitoba Employment Standards website and the Federal Employment Standards website as well. And it's important, I could go through all of the details on what is the minimum wage now as of March 5th, 2024. But again, if we're going through all those details and you're watching this video or this program 6 months later, that information might be out of date. So whenever I'm talking to our clients about finding out employment standards, we always encourage them to go to the website and have a look at what it is as of today. Now we have these employment standards laid out to make sure that everyone feels safe and comfortable and respected in their workplace. But most companies also have anti-harassment policies. And so that might also be included under employment standards or human rights as well. But if you do feel that you're being harassed at work, there's a few things that you can do to protect yourself. And the first thing to do is, if you feel like you're being mistreated, is to record the incident. So write down what happened. Maybe it's the date, the time, what exactly took place, if there was just one person involved, if there was multiple people involved, or if there was any witnesses to what happened. And it doesn't have to be a really traumatic thing, but if you're feeling like you're being mistreated, for example, maybe you've written a report and the manager comes in and throws it on your desk and says, this is not helpful. This is like a garbage report. What were you thinking? That could be considered to be harassment. There's nothing wrong with a manager coming and saying, we've got some issues with this report, or the quality of work is not acceptable. That's fine. But to be using wording that might be shameful, or shaming another person or degrading another person, that's a whole other thing. So writing down that information, or if you have emails or if you have voicemails, making sure that those are kept and recorded. And the most important thing is, you might do this in the moment, or you might wait for another time, but we really need to address it with the person that did that. So for example, if my manager were to come to me and tell me that my report was garbage and I need to do it again, and really just treating me in a disrespectful manner, I would need to talk to that person and say, I did not like the way that you talked to me. I can admit that I made some mistakes and I need to solve that, but please don't ever throw my report at me again. And please don't say that my report is garbage. It's okay to say it's not up to quality, but don't use that kind of aggressive wording with me, please. And we can say that respectfully. We don't have to be aggressive. So once that has been addressed with the person, if they continue to do that, that's when you're going to be addressing it with another manager or the human resources manager or somebody else with a little bit more authority in the company. Sometimes there might even be a union that you might have for your company. And so if you are part of a union member, you might even be able to talk to a union rep or steward, and just get some support if that's not being addressed, either being a manager or your coworker. And of course, there might be times when it's appropriate to contact employment standards or even the Manitoba Human Rights Commission. And that kind of depends on what the situation is. So again, there's no problem with calling Manitoba Standards, and you don't have to give the company's name, but just explaining what happened and asking what to do. And they can often give you some information, or whether they can help you resolve it, or they can talk to Manitoba Human Rights Commission. And again, most times I've found that most employers, most of the companies I've worked with have been very respectful, but it's always good to just keep this information in mind and address it when it's smaller, and don't wait for it to build up. And then you're dealing with something that's been going on for months or years. It's a lot easier if you address it sooner than later. Keeping in line with the safety at work, there are 3 main organizations as well that are here to protect you for work. Hi, Donna.
Hi, I'm wondering if would it be okay if I could ask a couple of questions just before we get to this part here? So you don't mind, would that be okay?
Yeah.
That would be okay. It's just in line with sort of these, I'm not sure if it goes exactly with harassment, but it's sort of about the idea of like understanding like what are some of the behaviors that like your boss and that are showing around you, so if you talked about punctuality and attendance, you talk about efficiency and self-improvement. Understanding like what's your advice to people when they say, like people are asking me to do things, but my boss isn't doing them, because that's something about the Canadian culture that might be different than other cultures. Do you have any thoughts on that? Because it could sort of sometimes feel like people are harassing you to do something they're not doing. Does that make sense? But that's not really, it doesn't always fall under harassment, right?
Yeah, and there's the idea of what's acceptable workload, right? There might be some industries where, I'm just thinking the construction industry sometimes, and they get the newest employee to do all the grunt work. Like if it's the dirty grunt work where you're crawling underneath the house or doing those kind of things, they're making the new guy do it. Or in some companies, it seems like the hardest worker gets more work than everybody else because everyone goes to the person for help. So there's a difference between harassment and the person asking.
Yeah.
And there's also the difference between learning as an individual to set boundaries respectfully.
Yeah, for sure.
So learning when it's appropriate to say yes or no. Like I can take this on, or you know what? I am busy with my own work right now. I can't take this on. So there is, in some ways, a bit of that maturity level where you have to decide on a case-by-case basis whether you're able to help or not.
Yeah.
And then again, sometimes when you're at a new company, it's uncomfortable to say no. But if possible, it's great to plan weekly or at least once a month check-in meetings with your supervisor or your manager so that you can kind of say, I've noticed that Billy has been coming to me and asking for me to do all of these things. I didn't think it was under my job description.
Right.
It's something that the person that used to work in my position often did, or should I be telling Billy I'm not able to do this for him?
Right. So it's a very interesting thing, because if someone comes to me and says, could you do something, as an individual, for me, it's like, well, I could do that on Thursday. I could start that on Thursday. Could that work? So when you talk about harmony, like even that is really sometimes the answer. It's kind of really understanding that space of how do we create that harmony, so we can create it by being fair with the answers we're giving, right? So, when I have time on Thursday because I'm finishing a project till Wednesday at 4. But it's a really interesting thing, because often the leaders' behaviors have such an indication on the group, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's so easy for these unwritten rules are such an importance. Like, it's one of my favorite topics probably is it's really interesting, these unwritten rules of how they can have an influence on all the things you're talking about.
Yeah. And some companies are fantastic to work for, and they keep in mind what people are realistically able to accomplish.
Yep.
And then there's other companies where they've got 80% turnover in their new staff because they push so hard. And maybe that's not a place you want to stay at long term. So maybe it's not your fault of not being a good employee. Maybe it's just like, oh, this is not the right employer for me in a long term basis. Yeah.
So if we think about sort of that idea, I know you have one or two more slides. I don't want to stop that. I just, if you think about the idea though, about when you start with that orientation, like kind of it's not uncommon for people to not get a lot of information before the first day. And so if you're one of those people, it's no one's done it with the wrong intent. Does that make sense for me? It's almost like, what is it that I think I might need to bring? So when I heard about you sharing about all those important documents that I might have to bring to work, if I'm not comfortable bringing those on day 1, would that be something you'd recommend? Like, could I bring them on day 2 if needed? Or do I have to sometimes bring them? Because like, where do I put them? Do you know what I mean? Like, where do I put those documents?
Yeah. So for example, I guess it depends on the company and how they work. Some companies are doing all of that paperwork on day 1 because they say, if you don't do it today, you're not going to get paid. Like, we can't get payroll in time for you. So you would be paid in 4 weeks instead of 2. Other companies might be able to review. You might have time to review things for a few days before you sign anything. But as much as possible, it's usually they'll have you work on those things within the first few days, and you've really got to make that decision of whether you're going to be continuing on with the company or not. And this is the other thing too, when it comes to termination, employment standards, at least Manitoba employment standards, the person can decide to not continue with the job, or the employer can decide not to continue with the new employee within the first 30 days and not give reason and not give any notice.
Yes.
So maybe you're working for the company for 2 weeks and you're like, this is really not a good place for me, and you decide to go.
Right.
But keep in mind the employer might say that too.
I think there might be some interest, like there might be giving permission to the individual to say, could you reach out to that person in email, right? To say, if I bring my paperwork in, is there somewhere for me to leave it that's safe? If people get their manuals, it's when they get all that information, it's not uncommon for them not to be able to take it all in, right? Like, it's so much information. So it's almost, again, giving, like, do you suggest that people sometimes, if they get asked for them in a Word document, that they get them so then they can use like the speak functions and some of the different tools that we have? So, because lots of people learn by listening, right? So are those some different tools or resources that you have? We have about another 5 minutes together here, so I'm not sure if that's the best use of time, but I think for me, it's about how do we take what companies have, and then how can we use the tools that we know we have as individuals to enhance our learning, right? Like, what can I do with information I'm being given to make it better?
And I'll be honest, most of the people on my team, English is a second or third or fifth or sixth language. And so we usually have a month of training to work in our department. And most of them have created we have a 100-page manual with information they need to know right away, and then even information they can learn months later.
Down the road, yes.
But a lot of them have created their own manuals in their own language. And so they're writing out in their own little notebook, or on their manuals, they're writing out additional notes for like what they can remember in their language.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And that just makes them feel a little bit more comfortable.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I agree. Yeah, there's a lot of tools on the internet now where you can actually just use the accessibility tools, and you're listening to a computer read it out instead. And so, or using Google Translate, right? To translate it into your own language if that's an issue.
Yeah, and they're tools that lots of people can use, right? Even if English is their primary language, it's is their first language. Because when anybody who's getting new information, right? Like for me, it's the idea of starting a new job. It's understanding, like, is there ways for me to get some of those resources? And then can I use these tools that I have, because I can read, I can listen. We naturally know those things are going to then sit with us inside it. We're going to remember them better, right? Yeah. When we get them from multiple sources, for most people, it's a good thing. I do know we have about 4 more minutes, so I want to make sure the ideas you have, you want to share. I just wanted to interject there.
Just talking about a little bit more about that safety. There's 3 organizations to make sure that there's health and safety is respected in the workplace. So the first one, Workplace Safety and Health, that's an organization that actually goes out to workplaces and inspects them to make sure they're complying with law. And then there's another organization called Safe Work Manitoba. So they have resources and training for management or even staff to help prevent workplace injury and illness. They even have training on like how to use a computer safely, so you're not hurting your neck or your shoulder, what have you. And then there's WCB, and that's an injury and disability insurance system, so that if someone is injured at work, they can get the proper medical treatment, or if they need to have some time off to recover from their injury, or to go back and they can only work in a different position, not in the one they're currently at, that WCB can support them. And of course, along with that is every employee has the right to know about the potential safety risks in their new job. They have to right to participate to ensure that safety is important, like they might be on a safety committee or a group that does more safety training. They have to right to refuse work that is not safe or the precautions haven't been taken. And they have the right to protection, so that, like, if you say, no, I'm not going to do this job because that ladder is broken and it's dangerous, I'm not going up that ladder, they cannot fire you. They cannot discipline for you if it's in the idea of protecting your safety. Now, if you're like, I don't feel like climbing the ladder, even though the ladder's safe, and that's part of your job, that's not a right to protection. So it has to be involved with safety. Just something really important too that I think everyone should know, that if you are injured on the job, whether you think it's a big deal or a small deal, there's 3 things you should do within 5 days. Number 1 is report it to your manager. Number 2 is visit the doctor and mention that you were injured at work. And number 3 is call WCB. I know of people that have fallen on the ice at work and injured their wrist, and they thought, it's going to get better. I'm not going to the doctor. It'll be fine. And then 2 months later, it was still hurting, but they were not eligible for WCB because they never reported it, never went to the doctor. So it's really important to do those 3 things within 5 days if injured. And let's say, hey, yeah, in 5 days, your wrist is feeling better, or in a week, your wrist is feeling better. Not a big deal. You didn't lose any work. You didn't need any treatment. That's fine. At least it was reported in case it gets worse. And just a reminder that the first month or 2 or 3 months in a new job, it can be exhausting and stressful. So again, continue to make self-care a priority. So eating properly, exercising, getting sleep, talking to friends, reach out to your coworkers or others if you're feeling overwhelmed. And again, try to focus on just learning the job. That's your big focus. And don't forget to do fun things and enjoy life. Donna, anything else we can talk about in the next 30 seconds?
I don't know if there is, but I just want to thank you very much. That was a wealth of knowledge. The importance of all that information you shared is really there. And just imagine a new employee coming in and actually trying to figure all that out in the first day, the first week. It's amazing how much we actually need to know in order to be able to work, right? But I just want to leave people with the thought that, the idea of soft skills, if you are interested, I do believe the Immigration Center, right, Amie? You offer courses and information on that and a lot of these different areas. So if you would like to, please reach out to her. She's definitely available to provide you, or someone on her team can provide you in the right direction as well. So remember, we enjoy working with people. When we have friends at work and we enjoy where we work, we naturally work better together. It is the simplicity and the complexity of that statement. And so thank you for bringing the concept of harmony, the concept of asking questions and having a voice and being a helpful person. So as the comment said, these are great tips. These are just really great tips and very useful information that you shared today. So thank you very much for all of that, Amie. I'm going to end the live stream now. And any questions, please let us know. We'll see you again next time. Thank you, Amie.
Thank you.